We have an update of the protest, the anti-ICE protests in Los Angeles, a response from Gavin Newsom and Donald Trump. And I want to explain to you how what is happening in LA is political, more political than anything. And I'll break that down for you and explain to you how it's the same team and they're actually bouncing off of each other and helping each other. Well, things got even crazier in Los Angeles just last night. Of course, police presence has escalated. Donald Trump, we talked about this. He brought in the National Guard. At the same time, now there is a call to bring in 700 Marines. And I told you guys before that that is a big no-no, right? To bring in the military to push back against the people. Like it's a big no. Like it's not something that is well received. And it also, and this has already been happening, but it also is going to give the public a more negative opinion about the US military, right? So again, all of these things are at play. We are going to start with this clip here from Fox News. This is Pam Bondi responding to what's happening in LA. Let's get into it.
Protect law enforcement and the people in LA.
Sean, what we're going to do is we are going to enforce the law regardless of what they do. Look at it out there. It looks like a third world country, and it's not. It's the United States of America. We are not standing for it. Donald Trump won't stand for it. And something else tonight, look at all those great men and women in the LAPD. We are going to protect them. If they will not protect them and prosecute people that abuse the LAPD in terms during a civil unrest under 18 U.S.C. 231, we can prosecute federally people who assault state law enforcement officers with a maximum of 5 years in prison, and we are going to do it. We are going to prosecute them federally. If California won't protect their law enforcement, we will protect the LAPD and the sheriff's office out there. Not only that, we have 9 open cases right now and more to come on assaulting federal officers. The Molotov cocktail cases that you've seen, we've charged 1, more to come, 3 outstanding. The looters, you saw they began to loot last night, going into 7-Elevens, going into drugstores. Typically, you don't charge those. We do under federal law now. Under the Hobbs Act, we are charging robbery. You loot a business in California, you are looking at maximum of 20 years in prison. You spit on a federal law enforcement officer, no more. As President Trump said, you spit, we hit. Get ready. If you spit on a federal law enforcement officer, we are going to charge you with a crime federally. You are looking at up to 5 years maximum in prison.
Okay. All right, honey buns. Let me explain to you what's really happening here, okay? Now, hold on one second.
Regardless.
Let's get her back up on the screen. So I just want people to understand the game that's being played, right? So as Pam Bondi representing the Trump administration, the Republican Party, it is their job to convince their supporters, to convince them that they are being tough on crime and they're going after the baddies. So, of course, saying things like, we're going to give you 20-year sentence if you're looting, like that type of thing. This is all an act, right? This is the same woman that told you that, oh yeah, we're going to pull out the list of the Epstein file. And you know how that went, right? So that's the game that the Republican Party is playing. At the same time, the Democrats in California are playing their own game, right? Gavin Newsom is very critical of Donald Trump bringing in the National Guard because he said you went over the governor. You did not, only the governor can do that. You're not supposed to do that. But at the same time, there is something that Gavin Newsom can do, and he's choosing not to do it. Now, here's the difference here, right? So the Republicans are a little bit more overt about supporting the police, right? Like, we're going to back those officers, etc. But the Democratic Party also supports the police. They're just not as overt about it. So this is the first part of the game. Now, let's go ahead to part 2 here. So I'm going to show you some of the things that I saw on social media. And I'm not even going to lie. This one right here, it says, this is the sickest thing a cyber truck will do. I'm not even going to lie. This was pretty clever. Like, just seriously, this was actually pretty clever. Watch this. Now, I can't play the sound because there's music and it says copyright. So I don't even know who owns the cyber truck or whatever. I do not know. But I just thought to myself, like, damn, that's pretty clever there, because that's, one of the cyber trucks, etc. It's a big FU, obviously, to the Trump administration. Now, I want to pause and say something here. It's very important that people do know that the media is going to run with the narrative that helps said party. So right-wing media is going to run with a narrative that's going to help the Republican Party. Liberal media is going to run with a narrative that helps the Democratic Party. But what I have noticed when it comes to some of the videos that are being shown on corporate media, what they're not showing you is that, from what I saw and talking to people who live there and were there, what I saw is that a lot of the escalation was started by the police. And a lot of times people, they don't see this, they don't capture this. Guys, this was going on back even in the 60s, right? There was the trial of the Chicago 7. And why were they on trial, right? Because during the DNC National Convention, there were protests outside of that convention. And there were people who were arrested. And they said, the courts and of course law enforcement said that the protesters started the escalation. They started the fight and the physicality, right? But what the evidence later showed was that it was the police who started that escalation. So keep that in mind when you do see these videos. And it's really interesting to me because when we go back to the George Floyd protests, this was another thing that I had pointed out to people as well. For those of us who did participate in those George Floyd protests, there were a number of cases where the protests were actually peaceful, but the media did not show you the peaceful protests for the most part. They showed you the ones where there was some type of violent activity. That is on purpose. And from what I've heard, talking to people who are there, most of the protests have been peaceful, but they're showing you the ones that have had altercations. So that's important for people to understand. For example, when you see these videos here of people looting. Now, let me explain something here. Here's another narrative that you'll usually hear on corporate media. Look at what these protesters are doing. You really believe the guys that just ran out of that store that were looting were a part of the protests? No. Guys, I saw this during the George Floyd protest. Remember, they put bricks around the area where protests were going to be. They put bricks outside stores to entice. This has been done so many times. And it was interesting to me how many people are falling for this. So there are two different things here. Let's not conflate the two. Don't look at this and say, oh my God, you see what those protesters are doing? Those are not protesters. But there are always people, and I've said this before as well, as someone who's an activist and organizer, there are always infiltrators as well too. But there are people, said people, who will put bricks outside of the stores prior, the night before or the day of, so that people can pick up a brick and like just break into the stores and stuff like that. Like, there are always people that get into these protests and these movements to make it look like the protesters are doing these things. And then there are people who are going to take advantage of the situation. Yes, like if there are police like pushing back against people, they're fighting each other in the streets. Of course, there are going to be people that say, well, fuck it, I'm just going to go to the store and just grab some stuff. There are always going to be people that take advantage of that. 9 times out of 10, those people are not the protesters. But again, a lot of times corporate media isn't going to tell you this. What was crazy about these protests, and I saw this as well, someone shared this on social media, protesting in LA is on another level. So apparently they came prepared. First time in my life seeing hot dogs sold on the 101. I had to mute it because of the... Yeah, so they had hot dogs on the freeway. And I think in California, they refer to the interstate as the, like the 101 or the 303. I think that's just a Cali thing, because like on the East Coast, we don't do that. We're just like I-95. But that was interesting that they were selling hot dogs out there. I guess they say, hey, people got to eat too, that type of thing. Now, here's another thing that a lot of them are not talking about. Put the protesters aside for just a second. Why are journalists being attacked? There were a number of videos that I saw where people who were just reporters who are doing their job, not someone who just went out there with their cell phone. I'm talking about actual reporters who were doing their job that were hit by the police. And here's one example I want to show you. LAPD shoots reporter live on air. See cop deliberately targeting a journalist. Now, she was hit with one of those rubber bullets, and she works for, it says here, 9 News. So again, this is not someone who just showed up with their cell phone. This is a legit, like, you know, reporter. This is her job. Watch this.
Out of LA.
Pause right here. We're going to stop right here, and you can imagine the rest. See this gentleman, this cop over here, see where the smoke is? He looked right at her and shot towards her. Journalists, obvious journalists standing right there in front of the camera. Now, why am I mentioning this? Doesn't this sound familiar? Doesn't this look familiar? Who else purposefully will attack journalists or even kill journalists? Israel. The IDF has done this to journalists that were in Gaza, and then eventually they stopped letting journalists come in. Why is that important? Who do you think the LAPD gets their training from? The IDF. Who do you think the NYPD gets their training from? The IDF. You see how some of the same practices that are used in the Middle East from the IDF are used here in the United States? Why aren't they telling you about this? Why isn't corporate media, all of them talking about the protests? Why aren't they calling out police officer who looked right at this woman? We'll go back here. I'll show you. Keep your eye on the left part of the screen. Right there, you can see, looked right at her. Right at her. There he is right there, and aimed right at her. She's not a protester. She's not attacking anybody. She's a reporter doing her job. Same tactics, fam. And then I will go into this clip here. So again, what has been announced now is that 700 Marines are being sent to LA, I guess, to try to combat whatever all of this is. And another thing I want to say is, despite what people may believe, if you talk to people in LA, what you're seeing on video, all of these different like altercations, is not happening in the majority of LA. The majority of LA is not experiencing any of this at all. But the media wants you to believe it is. Watch this.
More than 700 U.S. Marines. More than 700 U.S. Marines have been mobilized to respond to protests in Los Angeles, some of which turned violent over the weekend. One county official called last night, quote, probably one of the most volatile nights in the city's recent history. Police declared all of downtown Los Angeles, an area of about 5 square miles, an unlawful assembly area after a third night of protests turned violent. The Los Angeles police chief late last night saying, quote, this violence that I've seen is disgusting, unquote. Some of the protesters, or more accurately, rioters, shot commercial-grade fireworks at law enforcement officers. Others set self-driving cars on fire. CNN witnessed police using flashbangs and tear gas to disperse crowds. Police.
Now, again, from what I have been told, talking to people in LA, who were there, they said that it was the police who escalated first. They said the police attacked first. And like I said before, oftentimes on corporate media, you don't get that perspective. So you would think all the years of protests that have happened in this country that people would have woken up to this by now. Let's continue.
Arrested 27 people just yesterday alone. All of this started on Friday. That's when Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, conducted workplace raids in LA. The Department of Homeland Security said operations in LA last week resulted in the arrest of 118 undocumented immigrants, including 5 gang members and others with prior criminal histories of drug trafficking, assault, cruelty to children, domestic violence, robbery, and alien smuggling. The roots of this aggressive ICE activity last week may have been seen last month when top Trump aide Stephen Miller, sources tell CNN, demanded that immigration agents ramp up deportation efforts and seek to arrest 3,000 undocumented immigrants a day. 3,000, that's triple the number of daily arrests from the early days of Trump's term. In response to the ICE action in LA on Friday, some protesters began gathering outside the Metropolitan Detention Center. But as day turned to night, things got out of hand, not only downtown, but about 10 miles east in Paramount, California. Now, law enforcement says that protesters moved in on them and officers used flashbangs to disperse the crowd. The FBI's Los Angeles field office announced a $50,000 reward for information on a man that the LAPD says assaulted an officer and damaged property. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass said ICE gave city officials no warnings of these raids, which
and we already pushed back on this in Sunday's live stream where I said, you know, the mayor can say that there was no warning that they were coming. But honestly, the LAPD were already there before ICE even arrived, and they were assisting ICE. So the LAPD did know that they were coming. So Karen Bass, again, as the mayor of the city, you can fire the police chief. And that's where the other part comes in, right? Because when I tell you that a lot of this is political, believe me, because the reality is the Democratic Party right now is sitting back and they are relying on Trump doing this and just hoping, believe it or not, they're crossing their fingers, hoping that things continue to get people angry enough so that they can win in the midterms and they'll win in 2028. This is why they don't feel they need to change their way of doing anything or they need a new strategy per se. This is why they don't feel that they need to really do anything for the American people, even though they just lost to Donald Trump again, because they are just counting and like banking on Donald Trump being so atrocious that people will be so angry and that will turn into votes for them. This is all political. All political. Let's continue on a little bit more here. Gavin Newsom comes into the picture.
Made it difficult, if not impossible, to plan for quelling any spontaneous protests. Then on Saturday, President Trump took the rare major step of deploying the California National Guard despite the objections of the Democratic governor of California, Gavin Newsom. This was the first time a president called in the National Guard without a state's request or consent since Lyndon Johnson did it in 1965. President Trump yesterday told reporters that any violence against any law enforcement officers is unacceptable.
I have a little statement. They say they spit, we hit. And I told them, nobody's going to spit on our police officers. Nobody's going to spit on our military, which they do as a common thing.
Trump offended there by the notion of spitting on police officers or military while protesting immigration enforcement. He says that's not okay. We would be remiss if we did not point out that it was just 4 months ago that the very same president pardoned a different group for beating police officers while storming the U.S. Capitol to object to the 2020 election results. You will never hear Trump or top deputy Stephen Miller call that attack on January 6, 2021 an insurrection, but Stephen Miller did use that term to describe the protests in Los Angeles, calling it, quote, an insurrection against the laws and sovereignty of the United States. There are quite a few, shall we call them, evolving positions taken by Democrats and Republicans since a year ago, when some Democrats were urging President Biden to federalize the National Guard. In Texas, to stop that state's Republican governor's anti-immigration, illegal immigration efforts. Los Angeles
We skipped ahead here because I just wanted to get to this poll right here. Trump's deportation program. Look at this, guys. 55% U.S. adults like Trump's goals. 56% dislike Trump's approach. So what this poll tells you is that more than half like the goal that he has with deportation, but also more than half dislike his approach. Why is that important? Because when I tell you it's the same team, this is the perfect example. And what Jake Tapper was talking about there is like, oh, well, they feel like it's an insurrection in LA, but it wasn't on January 6th because it's all political. And a lot of what you're seeing right now is theater, right? So what do I mean when I say it's the same team? So first of all, get it out of your head that these are two different teams. They're not. Democrats and Republicans are not two different teams. They're on the same team. The same team. The poll is basically showing you that the majority of Americans agree with Trump's policy when it comes to deportation, but they don't like his approach. When I show you this graph, when I show you the votes, and I show you the graph of ICE funding, you're going to find that when you compare the Republican and Democratic Party together, even on this immigration issue, you're going to see they're closer than what you would think. And when I look at these protests, and I've said it before, you know, it's interesting to me. Everybody wants to get out in the streets and protest against this now. But when you look at the numbers, Barack Obama deported more people than Donald Trump. Joe Biden deported more people than Donald Trump, although it is still Trump's first year and his second term. No protest. There were no protests when Biden was president and Haitians were being whipped at the border. Now, I covered that. And I noticed a lot of people who say they're lefty didn't cover that story. Why? Where were all those protests then? This is how you know it's political. Because here's the thing. If you're against ICE and you don't want them deporting people, then why weren't there protests when it was happening under Biden and when it was happening under Obama? We'll get into that more. Here's a guy here who says he's a former Marine, and he explains why he's there.
Ira, you were saying you were a U.S. Marine?
I'm a Marine, proud to serve, baby.
How long did you serve?
To 2005.
What do you have to say about President Trump starting
It's
National
not
Guard?
right, bro. You know what I mean? This country and this state runs with immigrants. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm a son of parents that came from Mexico. You know what I mean? It's not right. It's not right. You could take the criminals away. You want to take hardworking people for, man. That's not cool. Not cool, bro.
So that's someone who is a former soldier in the U.S., right? Former soldier. And we'll get to the flag thing in a minute. So Gavin Newsom decides to respond. Here comes more politics.
What would be your message to him right now this evening?
Stand back, rescind this absurd, illegal, and immoral order. Let our military go home. The absurdity of threatening the people of the United States of America with their own military, our proud military, these remarkable men and women in uniform that do heroic work. Really proud of our Marines. I feel for them right now. I feel for our National Guard to be there in the fact that we had to send the PD, our local PD, to protect our own National Guard because they're being used as pawns. Mr. President, show some decency. Show some humanity. More importantly, act like the commander-in-chief. If you want to be president, you might as well play the part as president. At least fake it. Do the right thing. Stand back, and we'll clean up your mess.
Notice how he said, at least fake it. So here's the thing, folks, okay? So when it comes to the National Guard, because Donald Trump is the one who made the order to send them in, he would have to be the one to rescind the National Guard, to tell them to come, okay, you got to come back out. However, when it comes to the LAPD, that is the responsibility of Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom. Why is that important? Since California is a sanctuary state, LA is a sanctuary city, the LAPD, the police force, is not allowed to intervene to help ICE in deportations. So what the LAPD is doing right now is unlawful. So as much as Donald Trump has to be the one to pull the National Guard back and out of California, Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass are the ones that would need to check the LAPD. And they're not doing that. Why isn't Gavin Newsom, during these interviews, why isn't he saying anything about the LAPD participating in something that's unlawful by assisting ICE in a sanctuary state? Why isn't he talking about that? Why isn't Karen Bass talking about that? You see, the Democrats, what they like to do is they like to sit back and say, let's just watch everything blow up. Let's watch everything blow up under the Republican Party, and we'll just point and say how bad they are, but they'll never tell you what they could do. And I'm seeing a number of people on social media call this out. A number of people who live in LA who are calling this out, and they're saying, why isn't Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom checking the LAPD for not following the law? And I'll tell you why. Because honestly, I think they want the chaos to happen. Because politically, it works. Politically, the more chaos, the more, craziness that's happening out in the streets right now, it works politically. They can just point fingers and they can just say, well, Donald Trump did all this because he brought in the National Guard, he brought in ICE, he started all of this. This is all on him to help the Democratic Party. And Donald Trump can say, look at those pictures, and Republicans as well can look at these videos of them rioting out in the streets and hitting officers, etc. See what's happening in these blue states, these sanctuary cities, and that helps the Republican Party. The point is, both parties need each other to coexist. They bounce off of each other. They point fingers at each other and say how bad they are, instead of just focusing on ways that they can improve things for the people. There have been multiple protests, anti-ICE protests in different cities in the country. Don't you find it interesting that the National Guard was only sent to LA? There's massive ICE protests in New York City. People getting into fights and altercations as well. Why wasn't the National Guard sent there? It's all political. Even this message from Bernie Sanders, which people really, God, they chewed him out for this. Bernie says, Dr. King defeated racist government officials and ended segregation through disciplined, nonviolent resistance. Defeating Trumpism, oligarchy, and authoritarianism requires the same level of discipline. Violent protests are counterproductive and play right into Trump's playbook. So let's break this down. First part. This part here about Dr. King. First of all, as for Dr. King, towards the end of his life, he questioned if that was the right approach. Towards the end of Dr. King's life, he started to question if the nonviolent thing was actually the right thing to do, because what Bernie Sanders does not mention is that Dr. King had nonviolent protests. And while him and other civil rights activists were nonviolent, they were getting their heads bashed in. They had dogs sicked on them. They were being sprayed with those fire hoses. They were thrown into jail. Bernie doesn't mention that part. And Bernie was a part of these protests, so he knows. He conveniently leaves that part out. The other part that I noticed here, again, he's supposed to be representing the left, right? The other part I noticed here, he goes into defeating Trumpism, oligarchy, authoritarianism, yada, yada, yada. He doesn't say anything about the police. I wonder why. It's all political. So this is Bernie's coming in here. Like I said, people are chewing him up in the comments. Bernie is coming in here saying, no, don't do this. This is playing right into Donald Trump's hands. Why isn't Bernie calling out the LAPD? Why isn't he calling that out? He's supposed to be the left. You're supposed to be the left. My response was, say what? Professor Zinkus, why aren't you calling out the violent and brutal LAPD, Bernie? They trampled a protester with horses, beat the living hell out of other protesters, and shot them with rubber bullets. They even shot a reporter in the leg on purpose. It's all on video. Would you like me to send it to you? Here goes my comrade Nick from RBN. MLK was murdered by the state, Bernie. I mean, it's just, right? Again, all political, folks, all political. In fact, when we go here, Nico brings up such a really good point. Everyone pay attention. It is obvious that LA was specifically targeted by the Trump administration and the right-wing media acolytes for one purpose and one purpose only: to stoke and provoke violence to gain support for their dystopian Palantir information gathering initiative. And yeah, man. He points out something here. This is what I was saying. Pay attention.
You got to understand, this is how we know that this operation was carried out on purpose in Los Angeles, was targeted. And it was targeted to get support for Palantir's sinister, dystopian, information gathering AI, because there were protests in San Diego. And I'm sure the majority of y'all didn't hear about them, did you? There were also protests in Chicago this past weekend. There were also protests, smaller protests, in Houston. All these protests happened within 7 days of each other. And yet the only one we saw being discussed nonstop by this administration and by the news is the one that happened in LA.
The one in LA. Everybody see it now, right? So again, the idea is to provoke the people, then make it look like the people are incredibly violent. Thus, we need to increase the police state. Thus, we need to increase surveillance. Let's get more data on people and track people and watch people. But this happens under both parties. Don't forget, surveillance increased under the Obama administration as well. Both of them like to spy on us. Both of them. And now a number of people are sitting back now and they're wondering, well, if we had Kamala, this would have never happened. We would not be deporting people. You sure about that? A reminder of how Kamala Harris decided to discuss the border. Don't forget, she ran to the right on immigration.
You're doing this compromise bill. It does call for $650 million that was earmarked under Trump to actually still go to build the wall.
I am not afraid of good ideas where they occur.
So you don't think it's stupid anymore?
I think what he did and how he did it did not make much sense, because he actually didn't do much of anything. I just talked about that wall, right? We just talked about it. He didn't actually do much of anything.
But you do want to build some wall.
I want to strengthen our border.
Don't forget that. Don't forget, when it came to immigration, she ran to the right on immigration. And now all of a sudden, Democrats want you to forget that that didn't happen. It did happen. And there's a reason for that. Now, she may not have operated in the exact manner that Donald Trump did, right? She probably wouldn't have sent in the National Guard, like that type of thing. But she still would have participated in deportations just like Biden did, just like Obama did, which I'm tired of people sweeping that under the rug. They're all on the same team. Now, somebody sent this to me. Shout out to Tim Black for this one, because he said something in this clip that everybody needs to think about. Think about this for a second.
You could have got rid of ICE if you really wanted to. Biden was president for 4 years. Why didn't y'all work on getting rid of ICE? Why didn't you work on getting rid of ICE? Why didn't Biden write an executive order to obliterate ICE? I mean, I get it. Trump, USAID agency, crushed the EPA, all these other organizations, right? People talk about Trump, but why didn't liberals, when in power, do some different things? Why didn't they go and implement things their party wanted? Folks, I'm telling you, as we go through the course of this, I want you to pay attention to the fact that consider. Maybe Democrats don't want to win, they just want chaos.
Oh,
I mean, you can complain every day about the room being dirty. You can complain every day about the kids on the screens, or you can just take the screens. Maybe you like complaining. Maybe it's become a feature, not a bug. I'm just saying.
maybe it's because they're on the same team. So let's dive into this, folks. Let's dive into them being on the same damn team. Okay. Did you know that 75 Democrats joined Republicans to express gratitude to ICE agents and call for greater local and state collaboration with ICE? Did you know that? Now, we always expect there's always a few Democrats that decide to, vote along with the Republicans, usually maybe like one or two, sometimes three, that type of thing. 75? That's a lot. 75. Yeah. 75 of them. It's all political. This is a show. They're on the same team. Here's another one. I want you to look at ICE funding. I want you to see how ICE funding has been bipartisan. Actually, let me pop out because it's bigger this way. Check this out. The red is Donald Trump's budget. The blue is Biden's budget. So let's just look at this for a second, folks, okay? 2016, let's start 2018. You'll see Trump 7.5 billion, 8.1, 8.5, 8.4, 8.4. We get into the Biden administration of 2022. 8.9, 9.1 billion, 9.9 billion, 10 billion. Why are the Democrats giving more money to ICE if they don't want ICE to come and deport people? Both parties boosting and increasing funding to ICE. Maybe they're on the same team. The Boston Celtics. I know we lost. I get it. Boston Celtics, for example, they're a team. The Boston Celtics is opposition to the LA Lakers. They're opposition to the Knicks. They're opposition to any other team that they're playing on that court at that time. Any other team. The Democratic Party, the Republican Party, they're not two different teams. They're the same team. So if you're the Celtics, you have your starters that are on the court, and you got the people that got to sit on the bench. Just is what it is. You also have cheerleaders cheering you on. When we compare this to Dems and Republicans, they're not true opposition because the cheerleaders are the voters. The cheerleaders are the voters, and they're out there, rah, 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 rah. Right now, the Republicans are on the court because they have the White House, the House, and the Senate. The Democrats are on the bench. People get it twisted. People think these are two different teams. They're not two different teams. If they were two different teams, you'd be trying to win. You wouldn't try to just do a little bit here at a time. You would try to beat them, destroy them. When you go out on that court and you're playing against another team, you're trying to win. You're not trying to go along just to get along. They're not true opposition because both of these parties need each other to exist. They bounce off of each other. And they exist as one to maintain the status quo and to protect corporate interest, not yours. What you see happening right now in LA, this is all political. You see, the Democrats can sit back and say, oh my God, look what Donald Trump is doing. This is why you got to get us back in there so we can fix it. And then they win and they get back in there and they don't really change. They don't change anything that's going to improve and impact people's lives, right? They'll give you a couple crumbs here or there. but they don't make drastic changes that's going to actually improve things. If they did, our homelessness rate wouldn't continue to increase, even under their leadership. People wouldn't have medical debt. People would be dying because they can't get medical treatment. That's what's happening. Karen Bass, Gavin Newsom right now, they're both sitting back and they're like, oh, I told you guys. See, this guy is wild. He's a madman. Meanwhile, they're not telling you what they can do. They're not telling you how they can hold the LAPD accountable for breaking the law. See how this game works? And then honestly, I'm going to be honest with you. Both of them play this game because at the same time, Donald Trump sending in the National Guard and obviously sounding an alarm to send in 700 Marines into LA. That also, in a sense, helps the Democrats. Because even though Obama and Biden had more deportations, they did it in a more covert way. Donald Trump does it in a loud, overt way, so it gets a lot of media attention. And then everybody hears about it. Oh my God, I didn't vote in 2024. I'll make sure I'll come out this time. And everybody just keeps falling for the same old game. And then Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom, their leadership in LA has not been good. Here they are back in the news again. This is after the wildfires, right? So people see the video footage that's happening in LA and they see people looting and all this kind of stuff. And there's like, see what happens to these blue states. So by seeing that footage, it shows an example of them having poor leadership. That helps the Republican Party. That helps the Republican Party. And they say, oh God, we don't ever want to become like California. They bounce off of each other. They need each other to coexist. And like I said, as long as that continues, things aren't going to drastically improve. This is the part that I think some people don't want to hear. They are there to protect corporate interest. And by them being on the same team, they keep you in this duopoly, so-called duopoly. They keep you right there. Why do you think both of them are against third parties? This is the whole point. It's all a game and it's theater. So what I hope is that I hope that people don't fall for it. I feel like a lot of people are falling for this. And once again, everyone's attention is turned to this thing instead of what was happening over here. It's always something new and crazy going on in the US. So it's a game. It's the same team. Because if they were actually on two different teams, the Democrats will be trying to do everything they can to destroy the Republicans. They're not. They're not the Celtics. They're not the Knicks. They're not the Pacers. They're on the same team as the Republican Party. The only difference is right now they're sitting on the bench. Let's get to some of the comments, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, one more here. Sorry. She brought up a really good point. This is Madeline Pendleton, born and raised Californian here. Let me remind you what's happening in LA is happening under Democrats, no matter how much Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass try to say otherwise. LAPD is not supposed to cooperate with ICE, yet they are cooperating and violently mulling protesters. What did I tell you? Same team. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.